The Final Table. Mob bosses. One of the most lingering scenes in the minds of viewers of The Godfather has to be the assassinations of Sollozzo and Captain McCluskey at the hands of Michael Corleone. The scene, partly based on the assassination of the aforementioned Masseria, remains one of the truly great moments in cinematic history. It reflects several real-world events, some of which had not yet happened at the time the film premiered. May 11th, 1920. James Big Jim Colosimo, boss of the Chicago outfit, shot outside Colosimo's Cafe, Chicago. While the violence among New York's gangs was legendary even by 1920, Chicago was not a peaceful racket either. Big Jim Colosimo was from Calabria and established himself in Chicago largely through running brothels and committing petty crime. He grew his empire to become a leading figure in Chicago crime by 1900. He expanded into other areas, notably gambling and racketeering. He liked the high life and dressed the part, often in his white suit with diamond rings and other jewelry. The thing about being a criminal, even one with the pull Colosimo had, is that you're always susceptible to blackmail. And in 1909, Colosimo realized he had a serious problem. He called in a Brooklyn tough he referred to as his cousin, John the Fox Torrio. He acted as Colosimo's enforcer and got Chicago back in running order. Colosimo's gang was multi-ethnic, one of the first such gangs in the U.S., and was always on the lookout for new talent. It was Torrio who hired a young Al Capone to work as a bartender and bouncer at one of his brothels, officially bringing the future of organized crime into Chicago. Colosimo was all about the flash and fame, so it makes sense that he would open a restaurant and nightclub that bore his name, Colosimo's Cafe. The place was a hit, and allowed Colosimo to show off his wealth, drawing more and more interest from the community. The food, apparently, was really good, and everyone came for a good time. Now, importing Torrio gave him so much power so quickly that it led to conflict. The time of prohibition was upon them, and Torrio wanted to get in on the action. Colosimo refused. This tension led Torrio to take matters into his own hands, or, more accurately, to hire someone to take action into their own hands. That someone was Frankie Yale. A veteran of the Masseria family, he was a contract killer and incredibly feared. It was Torrio and his rising Lieutenant Capone who ordered the hit, and it was a smart one. They had arranged for a face-to-face with Colosimo and a new business partner at the cafe on May 10th, 1920. When he showed up, he was shot in the head by Yale, who was then hiding in the cloakroom. The murder left Torrio in charge and Capone as the clear up-and-comer for the throne he would famously occupy in just a few years. October 23rd, 1935. Arthur Dutch Schultz Fliegenheimer, New York rackets boss, shot inside the Palace Chop House, Newark. Few figures in New York mob history are as fascinating as Dutch Schultz. Born Arthur Fliegenheimer to German immigrants in the Bronx, when he got into the crime game, he chose Dutch to stand in for Deutsch, or German. Schultz was either because of the shipping company he had worked for, or perhaps because of another local gangster. Either way, it stuck. Possibly because it was faster to say than Fliegenheimer. Dutch worked as a bouncer at a club owned by Joey No. He liked the cut of Schultz's jib, not to mention his reputation for solving problems quickly and markedly, usually through the use of excessive petty violence. No made him a partner, and soon Schultz was riding shotgun on beer deliveries. Schultz was particularly good at smuggling and became a highly effective bootlegger. He was also brutal in putting down his opponents. A pair of bootleggers in the Bronx, John and Joe Rock, were already established when Dutch and No decided to move in. John was smart. He agreed to buy beer from Schultz and No after initially refusing. Joe didn't quite come around, so Schultz had Joe kidnapped, hung by his thumbs, and beaten. One rumor was that Schultz had tied gauze over his eyes that had been smeared with gonorrhea discharge. This rumor may have started because Rock shortly thereafter went blind. After that, very few people stood in the way of Dutch Schultz. The Schultz No operation was one crew that could rival any of the 5 families. That is, until Thomas Dewey. U.S. Attorney Dewey wanted nothing more than to bring Schultz down. His tactic was what would become the standard for taking out mob bosses without violence: tax evasion charges. In 1933, Dewey got an indictment on Schultz, which led Schultz to go on the run. But eventually he surrendered in Albany, part of a deal that allowed any trial to be moved upstate. The first trial was a massive media event, and it ended in a hung jury. The rumor had it that Dutch had bribed a portion of the jury. It could also be that they were just scared of such a feared figure. The second trial would take place in Malone, New York. So Dutch moved there and made himself a beloved community figure, giving out charity and cash to local businesses. The plan worked. He was acquitted in Malone. But there was a catch when returning to the Big Apple. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, the little flower, was tough on the mob, and said if Dutch was seen in the city, he would be arrested on sight. So Dutch became a bridge and tunnel gangster set up in Newark, New Jersey. The big thing about the trials was that they cost the Schultz gang a lot of money, not to mention brought new unwanted attention onto the rackets. The money was from various numbers games that largely funded the Schultz operation and had been sucked dry for his defense. And so he lowered the commission he paid on his runners, who made the policy racket work. This did not go over well, and the runners did something extraordinary. They struck. This work stoppage worked, and Dutch backed down. Each and every one of those runners was taking their lives in their hands, but they had made it through. During the trial, Schultz's number one guy, Bo Weinberg, got in touch with Lucky Luciano. He was running things more or less and wanted to maintain control of the gang after Schultz was out. Luciano had a different idea. When Dutch was found guilty, as everyone had expected, Luciano would move in and divide the territory among the Luciano family. This was a bold move, and Luciano made it before the trial ended. No one seemed to mind. The Schultz legal burden was off their back. Of course, after Dutch got off, he met with Luciano, who said that the Lucianos were just looking after the shop while Dutch was dealing with Dewey, and that they'd return full control after things had died down. Bo Weinberg, it turned out, disappeared about a month after Dutch's acquittal. It was likely Dutch who made him disappear, but it could easily have been Luciano trying to clear the way for a full takeover by eliminating the man who had been running things while Dutch was upstate. He disappeared after leaving a nightclub. Schultz was angry that the trial had thrown so much of his empire into disarray, so he approached the National Crime Syndicate for permission to take out Dewey. This would not do, and the commission met and decided that Dutch Schultz had to be stopped. With a character like Schultz, he had to be made an example of. On October 23, 1935, Schultz, accountant Otto Berman, Abe Landau, Schultz's new chief lieutenant, and his personal bodyguard, Bernard Lulu Rosencrantz, all went to the Palace Chop House on Park Street in Newark. Dutch ordered a steak and peppercorn sauce with fries. There are various accounts of how he liked his beef cooked, so no one's quite sure. He got up and went to the restroom, which is when two Murder Inc. hitmen, Mendy Weiss and Charles the Bug Workman, entered the chop house. Workman went straight into the bathroom and shot Dutch. Then the two assassins entered the dining room and shot the other three. Shockingly, all but the accountant managed to remain conscious, and Landau and Rosencrantz even returned fire. All four would end up dying over the following 2 days. April 7, 1972. Joseph Crazy Joe Gallo, Colombo Capo, shot inside Umberto's Clam House, Little Italy, Manhattan. The Colombo family began as a Profaci family in the early 1920s. They were the closest models for Mario Puzo's Corleone family in The Godfather, as they started in the olive oil import business. as well as being one of the major crime families of New York. In the 1960s, Joseph Colombo took over the Profaci family when a failed plot by Joseph Bonanno, Joey Bananas, who had taken over what was once the Maranzano family, and Profaci leader Joseph Magliocco, led to Bonanno hightailing it to Montreal and Magliocco being forced out of the commission. Colombo became one of the key figures in New York mob history, and the family still bears his name to this day. Joseph Gallo was known as Crazy Joe because as a kid, he acted crazy. He was actually diagnosed as schizophrenic. He made a formidable enforcer, and he and his brothers, Larry and Albert, headed up a gang of their own. The Gallos were shooting for the stars, and the crew actually kidnapped several key members of the Profaci family, including then underboss Magliocco and future boss Joseph Colombo. Profaci negotiated their release, but eventually sought revenge, leading to the First Colombo War. They tried to whack Larry Gallo, but he survived. They probably would have tried to take out Joseph as well, but he was in prison. They forged a peace in 1963. Larry had died of cancer while Joe was in prison, so Joe took over anyhow, running the crew from inside the joint. Joseph got out in 1971, and he quickly got back into the swing of things, including annoying the Colombo family. They wanted a peace meeting, but they only offered $1,000. Joe wanted $100,000. Not too long after, in one of the most brazen mafia moments in history, during the second ever Italian Unity Day rally at Columbus Circle, the event hadn't even really started, Jerome Jackson, an African-American, stepped up and shot Colombo 3 times in the head and neck. Colombo survived, but was paralyzed. Joseph Iacovelli was made acting head of the family, and he had to figure out who had ordered the hit. The cops thought it was a lone gunman situation, and others thought tensions between the Colombo and Gambino families were to blame. Most, though, thought that Gallo had something to do with it, and he was officially marked for death. Gallo's birthday saw him take his family out to the Copacabana, one of the most famous nightclubs in New York. Gallo wanted to see headlining comedian Don Rickles and singer Peter Lamangelo. Gallo invited the two of them to join him for dinner after the show at Umberto's Clam House, but they managed to come up with good excuses that got him out of it. The party headed off to Umberto's Clam House. They got to the restaurant around 4:30 a.m., and they passed Joseph Luparelli, one of Colombo's associates. He saw that this was a prime chance to hit Gallo, who he thought still had a serious price on his head. He headed around the way to a Colombo hideout and contacted Iacovelli and asked for the go-ahead. He then got in touch with Philip Gambino of the Colombo family, Genovese muscle Carmine Di Biasi, a.k.a. Sonny Pinto, and 2 members of the Petrarca family. This unified group returned to Umberto's, though Luparelli stayed in the car. Between seafood courses, the 4 entered and started firing at Gallo. He managed to get up and overturn one of the heavy butcher block tables and stagger out the door. Onlookers said that he was trying to draw the gunman away from his family, and apparently it worked. Revenge was brutal. Joseph's sister declared over her brother's coffin, "The streets are going to run red with blood, Joey." One night, Albert Gallo sent a Las Vegas hitman after Iacovelli and 2 other Colombo captains while they were dining at Neapolitan Noodle House. The Vegas hired guns had one significant disadvantage. He had no idea what his targets looked like. He instead opened fire on a different table of 4 diners, killing 2 of them. Iacovelli saw this as a portent of what was to come, so he fled New York, and this served as the opening salvo of the Second War between the Gallos and the Colombos. The war ended with an agreement in 1974. The remaining loyal Gallo members were welcomed into the Genovese family. This settled things, or at least as settled as they could be, in New York's fiery underworld. August 28th, 1997. Masaru Takumi, Wakagashira, underboss, Yamaguchi Gumi, Yakuza, shot in the hotel coffee shop of the Orient Hotel in Kobe. It's not just Americans that kill mob bosses in restaurants. The Yakuza's origins aren't as clear as the Mafia's. During the Edo period, Japan saw severe social stratification, with strict rules for how they operated in society. Two groups in particular were seen as incredibly low class. The Takiya, who were peddlers of low rent, often illicit or stolen goods, and the Bakuto, gamblers. Largely shunned by societies, the peddlers formed a highly structured group with a boss, Oyabun, at the top, and the Kobun, the lower-level figures in the family. This father-son concept led to strict bonds within the groups. The Bakuto were not quite as organized, but they did set up gambling dens in abandoned temples and pretty much anywhere else they could manage. They also had loan sharking and various other services that gangs everywhere seemed to engage in. These different groups morphed and merged at times, but by the early 20th century, the Yakuza, as known today, was more or less in place. The structure was key. The Oyabun serves as the boss, and the Kobun beneath him may establish themselves as Oyabun of their own operations, but still owe loyalty to their Oyabun. Typically, the Oyabun will designate a Kobun as the number one son, or Wakagashira. They could be seen as the equivalent of the underboss of the American Mafia. The Yakuza have adopted several distinguishing characteristics and rituals that mark them plainly. The most visible are their elaborate tattoos and the amputation of upper parts of fingers, though that practice is on the wane. They dress in a traditional loincloth called a fundoshi when they're hanging out around the clubhouse. Many wear fancy kimono or sharp American-style suits that you could see in 1930s Hollywood gangster films. There's a saying that if a Yakuza is going to wear white, wear all white. And if they're going to wear black, wear all black. The largest organization of Yakuza is the Yamaguchi Gumi. Formed in Kobe before World War II, they became particularly powerful after the war, and are still considered the most powerful. A young man named Masaru Takumi joined the Yamaguchi Gumi in the 1960s and rose swiftly through the ranks. He became Kobun under the leadership of Kazuo Taoka. He established himself quickly as a shrewd operator and was less flamboyant than most Yakuza. He was also incredibly good with money, an excellent organizer, and established his own group within the Yamagachi Gumi, the Takumi Gumi. As time went by, his offshoot, under Takaoka, grew wildly successful, and when Taoka died in 1981, as time went by, his offshoot, under Taoka, grew wildly successful, and when Taoka died in 1981, he was seen as a potential next head of the family. Alas, it was not to be, as the boss of the powerful Takenaka Gumi faction, Masahiro Takenaka, was chosen instead. Takumi seemed to be okay with it, but another contender, Hiroshi Yamamoto, took his men and left the Yamaguchi Gumi, forming the rival Ichiwakai. The Ichiwakai assassinated Takenaka in 1985, setting off a war that saw no permanent Oyabun established until after it was settled in 1989. Yamamoto was deposed, his men allowed to rejoin the Yamaguchi Gumi if they wished, and at that point, Yoshihiro Watanabe, who had been acting as the boss for a while, took over full control, and Masaru was named Wakagashira and the main financial master of the organization. Taro Nakano was one of the most powerful men in the Yamaguchi Gumi, and he also broke away and formed Nakamo Kai. They were known for their violence in and around Osaka. There was a local gang war that the Nakano-kai were fighting in, and Takumi, like any big brother would, told them to knock it off. This did not go down well with Nakano. They wanted to establish themselves as a significant force in their own right. So a plan was hatched. They would kill second-in-command Masaru Takumi. On August 28th, 1997, Takumi was sitting in the coffee shop on the 17th floor of the Oriental Hotel in Kobe. The Oriental was one of Kobe's most historic hotels and wasn't known much for its Yakuza connections, though a lot of the travel industry had various ties to it, both legitimate and illicit. While he was there, 4 men burst in and shot him. In daylight. In public. That would not do. The international media latched onto the story, and across Japan, it brought the Yakuza, who were known but not really paid much attention to, into every home in the country. This could not be ignored, and so many members of Nakano-kai were arrested that the gang was disbanded. Nakano stepped away and is still alive today. Thank you for listening to Food Criminals. I'm Chris Garcia. Next week, we're moving on away from mob bosses and hits in restaurants. Well, kind of. And we're going on to Part 2. Robbery. And a segment I call Freezers of Death. So I hope you'll stay tuned.